For over 1,000 years, Roman conquerors returning from the wars enjoyed the honor of triumph, a tumultuous parade. In the procession came trumpeters, musicians, and strange animals from conquered territories, together with carts laden with treasure and captured armaments. The conqueror rode in a triumphal chariot, the dazed prisoners walking in chains before him. Sometimes his children, robed in white, stood with him in the chariot or rode in the trace horses. The slave stood behind the conqueror holding a golden crown and whispering in his ear a warning that all glory is fleeting. This is my favorite quote from one of my favorite movies, Patton. And this quote is in fact attributed to Patton, the great World War II American general. This was a man who sought glory. You'll see in the movie that he was not just doing his duty. He was seeking glory. But he was seeking it knowing that it was fleeting. What does it mean for it to be fleeting? It means that it will just be over, gone. Have you ever noticed that a lot of people want their name on something physical in the world? A hospital wing, a park bench, the Kennedy Center, and a whole lot of other things for one person in particular who really likes the sound of his name and his voice. Trump is actually a caricature of this. He's the most extreme version I've ever seen of someone who just wants his name on everything. As if that's going to change something. As if that's going to change his life, or make him matter more, or make him more important. But unexamined, most people think it probably does. That's why they want their name on a park bench or a hospital wing. I remember we were walking through the Biodome in Montreal, and it was like this sign donated by the so-and-so, the generous donations of the so-and-so family, right? Even the smallest things. But what about you? Maybe you're not putting your names on everything. Do you want a legacy? Are you trying to build something that will outlast you? Are you joining something bigger than yourself? Do you want to change the world? Heal the world? Save the world? Do you want to be remembered? Do you want to create great art? Amass wealth? Shape your kids to be brilliant and talented? Do you want to build a business that carries the family name forward? Or perhaps are you more like the average American who spends 25 hours per week watching TV and 15 more per week on social media? 40 hours. Do you have an entire second job devoted to filling your time? Are you trying to stay busy? Are you trying to find a hobby? Are you one of those people who's told themselves that if only I had more time, I would do X, Y, Z, and then when the time shows up, you fill it in order to not feel bored? Do you know people who looked very forward to their retirement, but then grew antsy when they had it and got back to work? Are you working hard to be a good person in this life in the hopes that you'll be rewarded in the next? We do all of this because we're going to die. And we find death unbearable. All these behaviors, and if modern psychology is to be believed, perhaps the bulk of human effort and culture quietly reflects a single psychological drive to deny or forget that we will die. Obliviscere Mori. Welcome to Reconsider, a podcast to help you examine your life because the unexamined life is not worth living. I'm Eric, your host. I promised in the first episode of our return that we'd be going hard, and hard we are going. Today we're going to talk about death, your death specifically, and mine. You are going to die. Your death will be absolute. It is inevitable. It is inescapable. Someday you will be forgotten. Someday your name will be erased from even the Kennedy Center. Whatever statue is built of you will turn to dust. It might take as long as the sun turning into a red giant and of subsuming the earth. Who knows? So we can extend it. We can delay it physically. We can delay it psychologically. We can live a little bit longer. And we can have people remember us, or at least remember a form of us, a facsimile of us, a ghost of us. Simple, inaccurate, thin. But that's temporary. We're going to die. And this is the big philosophical problem. Camus, in the beginning of the myth of Sisyphus, says there is but one truly serious psychological problem, and that is suicide. And what he means is that one philosophical problem, suicide, is we have to ask ourselves, why do we keep living? Why keep going? And a lot of people, you ask this question, they've got a very easy answer. To enjoy life. Probably not thought about it all that much. Socrates in Phaedo, written by Plato, calls philosophy a practice of dying. Cicero or Cicero takes that, and he says that the philosopher, his life is a meditation on death. Montaigne takes that in one of his essays, titles it, that to philosophize is to learn to die. If we did not die, there might be no philosophy. That is part of what Plato writes in Phaedo. Why do we have to learn to die? We're going to do it anyway. The reason we have to learn to die is because it is so dreadful to us that we devote most of our effort to not having to face it, either through, on the one hand, pure distraction, hedonism, or worse, just pure distraction. Filling our lives with social media, with television, with, various forms of stimulation in order to not face it. Or to attempt a heroic immortality project, as Ernest Becker writes in The Denial of Death, which I recently finished. Denial of Death, 1973, Ernest Becker. He says, quote, "The idea of death, the fear of it, haunts the human animal like nothing else. It is the mainspring of human activity." He says that society, that culture itself, is a codified hero system. It is a system in which we can act out the drama of a made-up heroism in order to not truly die, in order that it mattered that we lived in a way that reverberates beyond us. There are various ways that we do that. If we don't have that, or if we start to see past it, we start to see Kierkegaard's dread, Nietzsche's abyss. When we start to really feel our death coming, we have a midlife crisis. And Jung, the midlife crisis is very real. In popular parlance, it's typically a man of some sort. It's typically a man. Buy the fast car, potentially cheat on their wife with someone younger, try to find their youthful vigor, try to refine their youthful vigor. Not just because it felt good, but because when we're young, we don't really see death coming. We're in an expansive state. We are expanding, right? Our powers are growing. But at some point, our powers begin to decline. And it becomes very hard to pretend that we're not moving towards death. And that's the midlife crisis. According to Jung, and Joseph Campbell with him, that can be the beginning of a great adventure, a great transformation. But you can fail that crisis. You can fail that crisis. And we'll talk about a few people who I think are failing it because they're so afraid of their own death and their own inevitable destruction. What are the kinds of projects that we engage in as immortality projects? Becker has a great catalog. He says, one's career, amassing wealth, amassing fame, making great art, subsuming oneself into a nation or tribe that hopefully will carry on forever, subsuming oneself into an ideology that transcends oneself. Obviously, religion often has a literal forever, or our children, or some kind of legacy. Becker says that we ache to have a cosmic specialness, no matter how we mask it. He says that we must stand out and be a hero. We cannot just pop into existence and then die and have that had no impact that outlasts us, right? Close your eyes and imagine looking back on your life and saying, the world is no different for me having been here. It does not really matter whether I lived or not. In some bigger context, it does not really matter. Is that an easy thought to swallow? It's probably true. Even the people who seem to have changed the world the most that we remember seem to have changed it quite temporarily. We'll get into that. A very common form of the immortality project, right, this effort to not truly die, is children, because most people have children, and there's a deep evolutionary drive. It's really tied up. Not everyone goes after art. Not everyone goes after fame. Not everyone subsumes themselves to an ideology or a religion or a cult. But many, many people have children. And often that legacy is just sort of normal. Someone whose genes are slightly more like mine than a bunch of other people's is going to be alive when I'm dead, and they'll have kids who are slightly more like me. Although a few generations down, it becomes indistinguishable, right? There's enough genetic mixing. It's like shuffling a deck, right? It becomes totally indistinguishable quite quickly. We don't really worry about that because the kids are alive when we're dead. Boom, lucky us, because then we stop thinking about it because we're dead. This can get very destructive, right? I was, until recently, working with sort of like wealthy, high-performing high school students, and I saw a lot of psychological damage from parents foisting their own mortality security on these kids who didn't ask for it, right? Bring them into the world and slap expectations on them. While you're in this world, you have to do X, Y, Z. You have to run the family business. You have to go to Harvard, right? Or go to some elite school. And there's this pressure that gets put on the kid, that the kid has to matter, has to stand out, has to be special, has to carry on something for the parent so that the parent can pretend that they don't truly die, because the kid is continuing something that the parent decided makes them special. It's very unfair to the kid, I think. It's very unfair to the kid. One of the reasons the Roman Stoics got really into memento mori, the Greeks were the original Stoics, but one of the reasons it became popular in Rome to contemplate the fact that one's going to die is that the whole Roman elite society and culture was really, really into family legacy. And it was mad enough that philosophers really honed in on it. Roman families really, really wanted to be the best. They really wanted to be remembered. They were hyper competitive. They wanted the top jobs. They built grand baths and other stuff and slapped their names on them. Maybe a slightly more healthy way of slapping one's name all over everything is actually building something useful and then putting one's name on it, rather than just trying to co-opt the Kennedy Center. But this hyper competitiveness was very, very destructive, as we've seen through the ups and downs of the Roman Republic. But they wanted these dynasties, and there was a bit of a self-awareness of this. Even without the Stoics, the Roman Senate had a statue of Alexander the Great at the entrance to sort of like keep this wild ambition in check by reminding the senators that, no matter how awesome you become, you will never, ever, ever be remotely as awesome as this guy. So check yourself, right? There's just no chance you're going to be as awesome as Alexander. By the time you're looking at the statue, you're probably already older than he is, and you've accomplished a tiny fraction of a percent of what he has, so get over it. Now, is Alexander the immortal one? His empire fell apart quite quickly. Obviously, a lot changed in the world quite permanently, or seemingly permanently, because of his influence. But how much different would the world be today if Alexander hadn't run around, knocking a bunch of armies out and killing a bunch of people? Would the ideas of Greece have spread to the Eastern Mediterranean and Persia? He didn't get to China, but a lot of Greek thought has made it to China. So did it really matter all that much? Did it change all that much other than killing a lot of people? Maybe. Now you might say, Eric, these immortality projects you're talking about, this denial of death, that's all well good for some people, but a lot of people run towards death, right? They face death boldly and run towards it. What someone like Becker would say is that they're able to do that because they believe that their death is furthering something that transcends them, that will continue without them. Kamikaze pilots kept, one, they had a flag of Japan, and two, often they kept the texts of the Buddha's Pure Land in their cockpit that they often had not read. But there was this sense that, one, they were helping, desperately trying to help Japan in its current iteration survive and continue. And they had subsumed, Japan at the time, their culture had really, really gone off the rails, right? It's one of the more kind of bizarre, twisted cultures we've ever seen, where, we're in a weird way, at some point by the end, they were all contemplating suicide. And that in a way, some gesture of theirs would live on forever, that they weren't willing to be defeated. They were just all going to die, taking out as many Americans as they could. When the Americans invaded the island, women and children were learning to run at people with guns, with pointy sticks. And it's a little bit like that, do not go quietly into that good night, rage against the dying of the light. And you feel a little bit of like, your heart kind of lights up a little bit at that. But then you really think, well, what's the bloody point? Like, what's the bloody point of being angry? If your light is going out, why is being angry about it? Why does raging matter? Why is some brief shout that's a little bit louder? Why does that make a difference? It seems to. We want the echo of that shout to outlast us, right? Who are other people? Obviously, the Vikings thought they were going to Valhalla if they died with a sword in their hand, right? Islamist suicide bombers, of course, relatively frequently believe they're going to be rewarded in heaven, sometimes with a harem. Sometimes not with a harem, but sometimes with a bloody harem, right? Crusaders were promised a quick trip to heaven by the Pope. But even in more atheistic societies, right? Communism, not quite Nazism, but the French under Napoleon, many were Christian, but it was a somewhat atheistic ideology. So under Hitler, under Napoleon, under Stalin, they had this national concept, the Japanese as well, had this national concept that transcended them, that they thought would be forever, right? The 1,000-year Reich. The Soviets, communism was all about, we're going to take over the entire world, we're going to transform the entire world forever, and everyone is going to be communist, whether they want to or not. And so these guys were willing to die for this thing that they hoped would live forever. And it's in fact part of the idea of the Immortality Project is, since we know that our body is temporary, we get to attach to this thing that we believe could be or hope will be around forever. And by dying for it, we transfer our life into that. And we give it life. We give it, we help it to live. Despite the fact that, none of these have lasted, right? No kingdom, no dynasty, no nation state, no ideology has really lasted. Now, the Chinese might look at me and go, well, you got something going here. And it just depends where you draw the line around it, right? Everything from 5,000 years ago, China to China now, is different. Everything's different. Genetically different. The language has changed. The ideologies have changed. They just call it China, right? It's a bit of a ship of Theseus problem. But one day it won't be China anymore in any way that's recognizable. What's interesting is, this is all very different whether you believe your personality is consigned to oblivion or not. Right? If you believe that there is an afterlife and that your behavior in this life is going to change the outcomes in the next one, it's a relative, your immortality project is relatively simple. It's relatively well designed for you. You don't have to angst about it all that much. But in particular, if you have doubts about that or don't believe it at all, right, you're looking for immortality on this planet when, the bloody planet is going to be gone, billions of years from now, but it'll be gone. So people don't, because they're not thinking about this logically, they don't look that far. They don't squint that hard at it. They're kind of just kicking the can down the road long enough that they can say, I've left behind a legacy. I'm not going to die. I started thinking about this problem specifically, actually watching the movie Coco by Disney Pixar. And when I was watching it, I realized there was something very, very dark about it. And in Coco, what happens is, it's Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, and the people in the afterlife sort of like come out and sort of visit, and and then they go back to the afterlife, and it seems like it's kind of a big party in a lot of ways. And the really dark thing is that, at least in Coco's conception of this sort of like Aztec, folk tradition, you need to have an annual ritual of like remembering dead people in order to keep them alive in the afterlife. And if someone stops remembering you, if mortals stop remembering you, then you fade. And this like literally happens. We see someone actually die. Right. So we have this world where like, yes, there is an afterlife and you can keep going indefinitely. You could be immortal, but if you are forgotten, then you die. And that seems unbearably horrible, that you could have immortality, but you have to hope that people who you can't communicate with keep doing some ritual in order to give you that immortality, or else you're doomed. And of course you are doomed. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is, Maslow's hierarchy is a bit of it's like he actually doesn't have a pyramid in a theory of human motivation, but it's close. It's close. If you look up the hierarchy of needs, at the very top is self-actualization, which you might argue, especially if you're kind of like, if you take Carl Jung's view on this kind of thing, it transcends the immortality project, right? One can self-actualize and like fully accept one's death. Obviously, on the way up to that are these more physical and psychological needs. And the one that maps to this need is, I think, esteem. It's that desire to be special, to stand out, to have the the esteem of your peers, right? To like be rewarded, to, imagine like the scientist who like gets to give up and they get the Nobel Prize and they give the speech and like they made it, right? They made it. They bloody made it. And once you've made it, then you're okay, right? And so we have, if we go back to these like high school kids that I was talking to, they face all this pressure to perform. Often they don't know why. Like if I ask them like, okay, map this out. Like, what does this get you? What does getting into Harvard get you? Like, do you get to relax after you get into Harvard because you've accomplished enough? Oh no, I have to be top of my class. Oh, okay. But then you get to relax. Oh, well, no, I then have to get a job at McKinsey. Great. Okay. But then once you're at McKinsey, surely you're going to make enough money and hopefully you'll enjoy the work. And that's why you're doing it, right? You get to make enough money, enjoy the work. And then you can relax a little bit, right? No, I have to be promoted quickly and then become partner. Okay. And then what does being partner get you? And they kind of like, well, I'm not really sure, right? There's just this compulsive need to be accomplished. In their case, like their immortality project comes from accomplishment. I remember one kid saying very specifically that he like needed to become like Einstein. And like, I get it. I've had that psychological compulsion before, but under examination, under scrutiny, it's absurd. And part of the reason it's absurd is like, I think Einstein is a great example of someone who sort of self-actualized by like living a life where he gave his greatest gifts to the world. And he really enjoyed doing it. But he didn't try to become Einstein. Feynman didn't try to become Feynman. Einstein was just really interested in physics. And he allowed himself to just be there with the physics questions that he was asking. And, at some point he realized he had these amazing breakthroughs and was quite famous, but he wasn't like kind of clenching his butthole and like squeezing in his, like squinting his eyes and grinding his teeth and going like, okay, I have to come up with breakthrough theories about science. That doesn't work, right? The people who have these breakthrough theories about physics, like they're not doing that. They're not trying to do it in order to have their name attached to it. Right? So I think those people sort of pass the esteem stage into self-actualization. People get stuck at esteem once they have the other stuff because they can't be ordinary and temporary and therefore meaningless. And you see people, there are these great examples of very famous people who I think are absolutely failing the midlife crisis and failing to make it onto sort of the next step into self-actualization. And their failure to advance past their immortality project causes these spectacular failures. So my two contemporary examples are Jeff Bezos and Tom Brady. So let's discuss them both. Jeff Bezos, right now, he's like, I guess he's like on Instagram a bunch, like literally kind of like dressing up and taking photos of himself and posting those. And I think there's like photos of him like clearly kind of like, he's hitting the gym and flexing his muscles from these photos. And you're like, man, what are you trying to prove? To whom? Right? You're one of the most successful entrepreneurs in history. And you sort of built all these amazing things. What are you trying to prove to whom? What is posting these pictures of you flexing on social media doing? And he stepped aside from leading Amazon, and now he's got a venture capital firm, and he's trying to get Blue Origin off the ground. And you kind of have to wonder, like, is he really enjoying it? And it seemed like early in Amazon, he was actually maybe even like closer to self-actualized. I'm not too much in the guy's head from back then, but he seemed to be like really interested in solving the problems. And Blue Origin is like not going particularly well. And maybe that has something to do with him psychologically. Maybe it doesn't. But I think like the fact that we're seeing divorced Jeff Bezos dating someone much younger and sort of showing off on Instagram. This is a man who is like in the midlife crisis and not doing so well with it, and trying to stretch back into his youth where he was expanding. I think Tom Brady has the sort of saddest story of the lot here, where Tom Brady is, Jeff Bezos, like, one of the great entrepreneurs of all time. Oh, okay, right. Is Elon Musk a more successful entrepreneur than Jeff Bezos? I don't know. They're both they're both very odd people at this point. Tom Brady is unquestionably the most successful NFL player to ever play the game, right? Just nowhere close. The guy had 5, maybe 6. I forget if he had 6 or had 5, but Super Bowl rings, right? Like, and then married Gisele Bündchen, a literal supermodel who I think is also a literal billionaire. Had the family, but he's just like he did it. Like, if you could check the box through accomplishment in the external world, if you could check the box, Tom Brady checked the box. If anyone could have just, if you could look at anyone and say, yes, unquestionably, in the external world, you have achieved a form of immortality. Everyone will always remember you, the greatest of all time. Your accomplishments make you worthy of the pantheon right? Your accomplishments make you worthy of like sitting on top of Olympus forever. And for the rest of football, which may not last forever, right? But for the rest of football, people go, wow, Tom Brady, right? He's got it. Nobody's beating that due to essentially the nature of competition. It's just as people get better at football, multiple people will get better at football, and you still have however many teams all competing for the same Super Bowl. One guy getting 6 of them is just bananas. And of course, at some point, he's like 40 and his wife says, hey, Tom, like, great work. You're kind of obsessive about football and fitness. He's got TB12, etc. And please come back to your family. Please retire and come back to your family. He goes, okay, fine, I'll retire. And he retires for a year and he goes, God, I just need one more. I just need one more. And crazy enough, he goes and he gets one more. He gets one more. And of course, Giselle divorces him because his chase for immortality, 1, is more important than his family. And 2, she sees it's inexhaustible. Whether she sees this consciously or not, it's inexhaustible. If 6 didn't do it, 7 wasn't going to do it. 1 more wasn't going to do it. But he doesn't see that. At least he didn't see that. He couldn't see that. It's compulsive, right? It's due to this like dread. And this is kind of actually like one of the weird tragedies of human psychology is you can stay distracted and kind of stay in denial as you're on the way up. But once you get to the top, you got this then what problem, this really terrible then what problem, right? I mean, Amelia Earhart, like she sort of had she was lucky enough to sort of like go out as she was finishing the big project. Buzz Aldrin became an alcoholic. Like he's literally the second guy on the moon. And he had this like just terrible now what problem afterward that the rest of us don't have only because we didn't make it to the moon, right? Like Buzz Aldrin, can he like go be like after that? Can you just like go be a guy with a job and a family? For the longest time, he couldn't because he got to the moon and the big hole inside of him, the big fear, the big anxiety wasn't fixed. Tom Brady got 6 rings and it wasn't fixed. And so this compulsion is very destructive for us individually. And it is all vanity. It's all vanity, right? I love the quote from Ecclesiastes, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. I've heard it translated differently as I've been to the corners of the world and I've seen the works of man, and lo, all is vanity and striving after wind. Yeah. Sagan in Pale Blue Dot again talks about humanity's wars were fought so that someone could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. And like if you imagine, we look back in archaeology and see these like cairns built for sort of important war leaders who like, we don't know who they are. And they've got some like rusty sword on them. And all these people built this thing to sort of be part of that person's immortality. Cause like, yeah, this person's really important. It's like, it was like village 1 against village 2 and they won the war against village 2. Everyone's like, wow, amazing, immortal. Right. And we see kind of how small that is, but like it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And like maybe someday someone does take over the entire world for a bit. Now they've really made it. Now they're really immortal. Right. But you can sort of see like there's no line that you can draw in these accomplishments to go like, aha, you've crossed over. You are now, you've solved the problem. You are special enough. Your life mattered enough. Right. It cannot be done. And so the wise see this. And so when we read the works of the wise, when we read the philosophers, they all point to this problem because they look around and they see what people are doing. And they go, holy moly, all these people are running around just kind of half asleep, acting out these compulsions and dramas. And Marcus Aurelius, for example, one of my favorites, the great Stoic emperor, as Eckhart Tolle said, one of the few men who had both power and wisdom, right? So he's a really interesting guy to read about. He says, everything fades so quickly, turns into legend, and soon oblivion covers it. He's writing this in Meditations. He's writing it to himself. I and everything I do will fade quickly, will turn into legend. I love that he acknowledges that there's this stage where it's sort of remembered, but then soon oblivion covers it. Gone as if it never existed. Is this podcast my immortality project? Like, am I also just acting out this compulsion? What is the difference between someone just acting out the compulsion versus just sharing their gifts with the world? I don't know. I'm working on it. We've got this problem at a species level too. I mentioned this last time. This is going to be a little bit relevant to our thread on AI, where humans have a really hard time with the idea that humans aren't the most super special. Because, of course, if humans aren't the most super special, then being the most super special human doesn't really mean much. It's sort of the tallest dwarf thing. Even in 1917, Freud pointed this out very, very nicely by talk in A Difficulty in the Path of Psychoanalysis. He names 3 historical, quote, blows to human narcissism. And Becker talks about narcissism too. The big thing is narcissism. I have to be special. I have to be important. Out of the 108 billion people who've ever lived, I have to be important. But there's a human narcissism. Our species must be important, because our species has to be important for me to be important. And so these 3 historical blows to human narcissism are cosmological, right? Copernicus, Galileo, great. I think I said Galileo last time. I think Copernicus was the guy. Biological, Darwin, right? So the cosmological one is, we're not at the center of the universe. Deal with it. The biological one was, we weren't popped into existence as fundamentally different from the animals. We evolved from them and with them, and we are very, 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 very much like a whole lot of them. Deal with it. And then the psychological blow to human narcissism. We are not the master of our own mind. Most of what we do and what we think is automatic, and we have a module in our minds, and this part is settled science. We have a module in our minds that rationalizes our decisions and tells ourselves a story about why we did them, about why we made them, even at the smallest level. And it usually lies. A good example here is split brain patients. Because the left brain does the talking, basically, if you get the right brain to do something, it can't communicate over to the left brain because it's a split brain patient, and the left brain will just make up reasons the right brain did what it did. Totally confidently. You don't even know you're lying. You're rationalizing. So we're these very good rationalization machines. Here's why we did X, Y, Z. And as we realize that, as we learn that through the development of psychology, as we learn more and more about our minds, we even go, it's not just our place in the world that's not special. It's not just our bodies that aren't special, but our mind is mostly running on autopilot. And what I'm doing is not special. What I'm thinking is not special. It's not even mine. All the ways that we have since then looked to justify that we as humans are special sort of keep getting knocked down, right? It's just it's like weird. It's this very important thing for a lot of people that we know the way that we are different and special from the animals. Why? I don't know. It's narcissism. Like, why do we need some defined way? Why do we need to build a little pestle? It's like, this is the thing that we do that's different from the animals, and therefore we're special, and therefore we're okay. So this is the same shape as AI is never going to do what humans do in da-da-da-da-da, right? The uniquely human line keeps getting drawn further and further back. And I think in 20 years, we might desperately be trying to pretend that AI doesn't have, quote, real creativity. But the problem is not that we're going to find that AI is magic and special. The problem is that our brains are not magic and special. Creativity is a result of, a meat machine developed by evolution. It happens, but it's not from some super physical or paranormal ghost spark. It's from this thing. It's an emergent property of this thing that was not designed to be creative. And could it be an emergent property of something else? So I do think superintelligence is the 4th blow and the big one, because it's going to end up literally doing all the things that we do that we think are really special. And this is sort of going to be a big problem in 20 years, that like we can't really have these immortality projects anymore that make us feel special or accomplished, like art or, wealth development or et cetera, because in an age of superintelligence, and we'll get more to this later in another episode, but in an age of superintelligence, someone who could be like, look at this amazing book I wrote, I am therefore immortal. It's like, I wrote, it's like cranking out books all the time. Actually, I don't even know if it's going to look like that, but there isn't this like scarcity of accomplishment or scarcity of development of art or wealth or technological progress or scientific progress for individuals to try to claim anymore. And so it's going to make the immortality project, it probably is going to like pull the veil off of the immortality project, right? We're going to see the man behind the curtain. What's going to happen then? We'll talk about it another time. So at some point, this illusion becomes clear, and you wake up enough that it's harder and harder to fool yourself, and you look around and you see what other people are doing, and it seems very important to them. And when you see why, you can go, ooh, right? And the illusion stops working when people say, oh, you have to do something that gives you meaning. It's like, well, isn't that just a psychological salve? Like if I know I'm doing it just to give myself a sense of meaning, it doesn't give me a sense of meaning anymore. It's just, I just know that I'm like self-soothing. So there's no meaning in it, right? It has to be an illusion for it to work, right? And like any magic trick, it has to be an illusion for it to work. Unlike magic, you can't enjoy it when you know that it's a trick. And so there's this risk that everything starts to look very pointless. This is why, philosophy is not a set of things to believe. It is a way. It is a practice, right? A philosopher's life is to learn how to die. It's their whole life, right? The Buddha didn't stop meditating, which is, by the way, it's not just sitting with your eyes closed. Meditation is a way to develop insight. Didn't stop meditating when he became enlightened. He actually probably did it more. Socrates didn't stop philosophizing. Jesus didn't stop praying. It isn't a matter of like absorbing certain knowledge and then you're done. Memento mori is one of those things. You can't go like, right, okay, I know I'm going to die. Done, fine. All right. Being able to deal with this problem of your own death is something that is a way, a practice, an art itself. So memento mori is a call to action, right? Memento mori means remember that you shall die. It's a call to action to remember. And you mostly can't just do that. You have to, develop in order to face your death and choose what to do with it, right? That's why it says remember, not just like, hey, you're going to die. It's remember. That's why it's why the Stoics wrote about this and literally like painted skulls and kept skulls with them, because it was part of this being on this path. Marcus Aurelius used meditations, right? It's literally his diary, his journal. And much of meditations is his process of philosophizing about his death, about the temporariness of him and everything. And keeping that awareness and then allowing his mind to face that and say, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Why does this matter? And it's because if some large part of your efforts as a person are dictated by an unexamined, unconscious scrambling to deny the one great inescapable thing, right? To deny the undeniable, then you're being unconsciously steered around by a deep illusion. And wouldn't you want to see that? And what do you do once you see that illusion? There isn't an easy answer. There is an answer, but there isn't an easy answer that can be spoken to you and known, and they go, okay, thanks. Glad I know that. Right? This is philosophy. The point is not to just say, okay, you're going to be forgotten, you're going to die, nothing you do matters. That's fine, right? The people who say nothing you do matters and therefore let's party, that is going to catch up with them real quick. They're distracting. It catches up with them. What we need to do is find out who it is that's so afraid of dying. What is so afraid of dying? Where does that fear of death come from? What if you didn't have it? Must you have it? Must you serve it? Must you serve that fear of death? Or can you transcend the fear of death? I'll close the quote from the great Alan Watts in Become What You Are. Just as the bird leaves no trace, no record of its flight upon the void, so human desire can gain nothing out of life. But to realize this as it wants to become the sage, since the greatest wisdom lies on the other side, immediately on the other side of the greatest despair. It is, of course, something more than despair, a joy, a sense of creative life and power. I might even say a security and a certainty beyond any imagining. But this is a way of feeling which the will and the imagination are as unable to bring about as to make one's bones grow or decrease the speed of the pulse. They must happen by themselves.